The courtroom in Toledo, Ohio, carried the faint layered scent of aged documents, lukewarm coffee, and the unsettling blend of stale air and palpable tension. Behind the scarred wooden defense table, Monique Ellison stood, fingers clenched around a well-worn manila folder. Her knuckles were white, her cheeks streaked with tears she'd given up trying to conceal some time ago. "Your Honor," she began, her voice thin and fragile like a signal struggling to connect. "I didn't intend any disrespect to the court. It was a medical emergency. My daughter, she has severe asthma. I had to rush her to the ER." She didn't plead, didn't raise her voice. She simply spoke as if expecting to be treated with basic human dignity. But Judge Perry Benedict didn't immediately grant her even a glance. He deliberately paged through paperwork, his movements slow as if her words were merely background noise. When he finally looked up, a faint, condescending curve touched his upper lip. "Miss Ellison," he said, his tone utterly devoid of warmth, "you people always seem to find yourselves in crisis precisely when it's time to face accountability." A heavy silence fell across the room. Then a few stifled laughs. Two individuals in the gallery failed to contain their amusement. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Yet no one challenged the judge. No one spoke up. Not even her public defender. Monique couldn't respond. Her mouth opened but no sound escaped. She'd faced judgments before but being laughed at openly, her daughter's emergency detailed in the folder she held. While a judge acted inconvenienced, something inside her simply fractured. Her gaze dropped to her worn shoes. One was scuffed, the sole separating. A wave of self-consciousness washed over her. She felt foolish for wearing them, for believing she stood a chance. Judge Benedict's pen tapped against his notepad. "The court finds the mother in violation of the prior custody agreement. Supervised visits are hereby suspended until the next review, 6 months from today." That was the extent of it. No further explanation, just a verdict that landed like a physical blow. Her eyes darted to the gallery. No familiar faces, just indifferent strangers awaiting their own turns. But then the door at the rear of the courtroom swung open. A man entered. He wasn't hurried but moved with the quiet confidence of someone with a clear purpose. Navy blue suit, black leather briefcase, a government badge clipped to his belt. Monique didn't register him at first, but the court clerk did. The judge did too. For the first time that morning, Benedict blinked. His smirk vanished. The man took a seat quietly in the second row. He didn't speak, merely observed. Monique turned slightly, her eyes fixing on the figure. She froze. 5 years had passed, but that face was unmistakable. Julian. Her brother. She hadn't seen him since the funeral, since the bitter argument that drove him from Toledo for good. Yet he wasn't here for a casual reunion. The intensity of his gaze, directed squarely at the judge, was palpable. This was clearly more than just another custody hearing. Julian Prescott had resolved never to set foot in Toledo again after law school. He'd left the city behind, vowing to escape a place that seemed to take relentlessly. 4 years he kept that promise, immersing himself in his career, climbing swiftly through the ranks in Washington, D.C. The title, Assistant U.S. Attorney, became his identity, far more than just a line on a business card. But 3 nights prior, a voicemail shattered that carefully constructed distance. "Julian, it's Monique. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but they're trying to take Layla. I messed up. I missed court and the judge, he said things. I just don't know what to do anymore." The absence of tears in the message was what struck him hardest. He listened 3 times, then packed a bag. 5 years. 5 years of silence. No shared birthdays, no holiday texts, not even after their mother passed. Their last conversation had ended with slamming doors and harsh words. Julian had accused her of never getting her life together. She'd countered that he thought himself superior simply because he'd escaped, that he had no understanding of raising a child alone. She was right, he didn't. But her plea about "they're trying to take Layla" resonated deeply. He still held onto the last photo she'd sent. Layla's tiny face, chubby cheeks, a gap-toothed grin framed by countless braids. That little girl was the last tender link between them, and now she was caught in the crossfire. Julian hadn't sought permission to show up. He wasn't even sure Monique wanted him there. But some instincts don't require approval. They simply demand action. On the flight, he accessed Monique's court file, a privilege of his federal position. What he read made his stomach churn. 3 previous hearings. Each time, Monique had appeared alone without legal counsel, trying to navigate a system seemingly designed to overwhelm people like her. And Judge Perry Benedict, a name Julian recalled from a hushed misconduct complaint, buried and closed, never publicized. That case had been dropped, but seeing this situation, the disturbing pattern was undeniable. By the time Julian entered that courtroom, he wasn't just Monique's brother. He was an observer who recognized the subtle, insidious nature of unchecked power. As he watched the final moments of the hearing unfold, he felt no pity for Monique. His gaze was fixed on the judge. He made a silent vow, not today. But before he spoke, he needed Monique to grasp one crucial truth. He wasn't there to rescue her. He was there to stand with her, to ensure her voice would finally be heard. The courtroom stirred. Papers rustled, lawyers murmured, people gathered their belongings. The judge reached for his gavel to adjourn the session. "Excuse me, Your Honor," Julian's voice cut through the room, calm yet commanding. Heads turned. Monique froze. The bailiff looked bewildered. Even the court reporter paused, fingers suspended above the keys. Judge Benedict raised an eyebrow. "And you are?" Julian stepped into the aisle, approaching the bench unhurriedly. Julian Prescott, Assistant U.S. Attorney, Washington, D.C. District. Bar number ending in 4419. He produced a folded ID, allowing the judge a clear view of the seal. The judge's expression shifted, a subtle, involuntary reaction, like something unpleasant had just registered. He merely adjusted in his chair. "Interesting timing, Mr. Prescott," he said. "This is not a federal case." "No," Julian replied smoothly. "But it's one that has captured my attention." He briefly turned towards Monique, who stood motionless, lips parted as if unsure whether to speak or simply breathe. "Miss Ellison," Julian said gently, "may I represent you?" She blinked, a silent beat in the suddenly hushed room. "Yes," she whispered. Julian didn't immediately face the judge again. He turned to the court clerk. "I wish to file a motion to reopen the custody review, based on procedural misconduct and the absence of adequate legal representation during prior hearings." Judge Benedict leaned forward, his composure visibly strained. "This is highly irregular." "As is publicly mocking a defendant within earshot," Julian countered, his voice even. A low murmur went through the gallery. The bailiff stepped forward, stopping only when the judge raised a hand. The tension was thick, but Julian's tone remained steady. He didn't need to shout. His calmness carried authority. "I've reviewed the transcripts," Julian continued. "I've reviewed your prior rulings. There's a documented pattern here. Denials without hearings, failure to notify opposing counsel of schedule changes, multiple unrecorded sidebars. Not to mention the language used today. Would you like me to read it back to you?" The judge said nothing. Julian stepped closer, placing a printed document on the clerk's desk. "That's your voice, Your Honor. Clear as day." He turned back to Monique, who was now seated behind him. "This is your hearing now," he told her. "Not the judge's. You get to speak without fear, without being dismissed. I'll make sure of that." Monique looked down at her lap, her lips quivering. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was battling a storm alone. Judge Benedict cleared his throat. "This court is not subject to threats." "I'm not threatening you," Julian replied. "I'm watching you. That's the part you're not accustomed to." For a long moment neither man moved. Then the judge leaned back, his face tight. "The court will recess until after lunch. Both parties will return at 1:15 with all documentation." Julian nodded once. "See you then." He turned back to Monique, motioning for her to stand. They walked out of the courtroom together. Outside in the hallway, Monique finally found her voice. "Why are you here, Julian? After all this time?" He looked down at her. "Because you asked. You might not have said it out loud, but I heard it." She stared at him, eyes wide with disbelief. "You're not mad anymore?" "I am," he admitted. "But I'm more angry about what they've been allowed to do to you." Anger alone wouldn't suffice now. The next steps had to be grounded in facts, in the fight ahead. The courthouse cafeteria was sparse, occupied by a few solitary figures hunched over vending machine meals. Monique sat opposite Julian at a quiet corner table, nervously fiddling with her hospital aid badge. "I didn't know who else to call," she said softly. You didn't, Julian replied. You just left a message. She offered a small, tired smile, the kind born of exhaustion, not humor. Same thing, isn't it? Julian studied her face. Time had etched fine lines beneath her eyes, a weariness in her posture. But she was still his sister, still the same fiercely stubborn girl who used to chase him down the street, hairbrush in hand, yelling about fairness. You shouldn't have been going to court alone, Monique. I know that now, she said. But legal aid was a dead end. I waited 2 months for a callback and then they told me the day before my hearing they had no capacity. Layla was sick, I couldn't miss her treatment. So I missed court. It was that simple. Julian nodded, offering no judgment. She wasn't making excuses, she was stating a stark reality. They returned upstairs 15 minutes early. Julian used the time to review the hearing transcripts he'd printed, highlighting judges' comments, identifying procedural gaps, everything that felt wrong. When 1:15 arrived, they walked back into the courtroom together. The atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. No one laughed when Monique entered this time. People sat up straighter. Judge Benedict returned to the bench, jaw tight, face pale. We are reconvening the matter of Ellison versus Harris. Mr. Prescott, you've filed a motion to reopen the custody decision on grounds of misconduct. Yes, Julian confirmed. And I'd like to submit supporting documentation, transcripts, prior hearing notes, and a request to bring in an independent court officer to review the judge's case history on similar matters. The judge scoffed, a shaky sound. This court has nothing to hide. Then you won't object to us shedding some light, Julian responded coolly. Gasps rippled through the back of the room. A local reporter had slipped into a seat. Word was spreading. Judge Benedict attempted to regain control. Mr. Prescott, you are bordering on contempt. And you, Julian retorted, unflappable, are bordering on removal. He handed a packet to the clerk, then turned to the gallery. This isn't just about one ruling. This is about a pattern. A pattern where people without legal representation are denied justice. Monique swallowed hard, her hands trembling in her lap. But when Julian glanced back at her, she managed a small nod. He was articulating what she'd felt for so long. Maybe, just maybe, people were finally listening. Across the aisle, Layla's father, Gregory Harris, leaned in, whispering urgently to his attorney. The lawyer frowned, jotting a note. Whatever confidence they'd arrived with was visibly eroding. The judge tried a different tactic. We'll allow a continuance to review the evidence. 2 weeks. No, Your Honor, Julian interrupted. My client's rights have been disregarded long enough. We request immediate reconsideration of the visitation order while the misconduct investigation proceeds. She hasn't seen her daughter in 43 days. The judge hesitated. The bailiff stepped forward, leaning towards the bench for a hushed, tense exchange. The judge rubbed his temple. Finally, he exhaled through his nose. Temporary visitation is reinstated. 2 supervised hours per week, commencing tomorrow. Monique gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Julian didn't look back at the judge. He simply placed a gentle, steady hand on his sister's shoulder. The battle wasn't won, but a vital foothold had been secured. Even a small victory in a place like this could send significant ripples. That same evening, Julian filed a formal judicial conduct complaint with the Ohio Board of Professional Conduct. He included annotated court transcripts, Monique's testimony, and even a copy of an old case he'd recalled, State versus Kelly Moreno, where Judge Benedict had callously dismissed a young mother's plea by saying her tears won't pay her rent. He had the line word for word from the transcript. Unchallenged back then, it was now exposed. By the end of the week, reporters from the Toledo Sentinel and even an outlet from Columbus were digging deeper. 3 different public defenders came forward, initially anonymously, confirming similar treatment. Dismissive, abrupt, even cruel, particularly towards clients who didn't fit a certain profile or lacked an advocate willing to push back. Monique faithfully attended her supervised visits. Layla was hesitant at first, quiet, uncertain. But during their 3rd visit, she slipped her small hand into her mother's and asked, "Are we going to be together again soon?" Monique offered no false promises, only held her daughter close and whispered, "I'm trying, baby. I'm trying hard." Meanwhile, Judge Benedict began to feel the pressure. A memo from the state's Judicial Review Board landed on his desk. The chief judge of the district requested a formal inquiry into all his recent family court decisions. He attempted to maintain his usual routine, but his authority was diminished. Court sessions were quieter. Lawyers watched him more closely. Even his clerk seemed slower to comply with his orders. Julian hadn't returned to DC immediately. He'd taken a temporary leave, staying near Monique not just for her support, but for the process itself, for the message it was sending. One evening, as they sat in Monique's small apartment living room, she handed him a bowl of reheated spaghetti. They ate in comfortable silence for a while before she finally asked, "Why didn't you come home all those years, Julian?" He wiped his mouth with a napkin, considering his words carefully. "I felt like I didn't belong here anymore. Like being gone meant I'd left for good. But deep down I think I was just afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of being back in the middle of everything I couldn't fix." Monique nodded slowly. "You couldn't fix it all. But you came when it mattered." She looked over at him, and for a moment the weight between them felt lighter. Not gone but eased. The next day a letter arrived at the courthouse. Judge Perry Benedict was placed under temporary suspension, pending the outcome of a formal investigation. It wasn't a public spectacle, no handcuffs or scolding, but it carried significant weight. The court system couldn't simply avert its gaze any longer. Weeks later, Monique found herself standing outside that same courtroom, but this time, Layla held her hand. There was no shame, no folder clutched defensively. Just a quiet resolve. Julian joined them in the hallway, adjusting his tie. "Ready?" She nodded. Inside, the court had appointed a new judge, Marianne de Lacroix. Firm yet fair. She reviewed the full case history, allowed both sides ample time to present their arguments, and addressed Monique directly. "Miss Ellison," she said, "you have faced repeated setbacks in this case, many beyond your control. Today we are creating space to correct that." Monique didn't cry this time. She stood tall. She spoke clearly. And when it was over, she walked out with her head held high. Even then, she understood this extended beyond her single case. It was about demonstrating to the system that someone had been observing, and this time they were watching back. The final hearing arrived sooner than anticipated. 3 months had passed since Julian first entered that courtroom. 3 months of diligent digging, filing, emailing, and following up. 3 months of Monique consistently showing up. To every supervised visit, every parenting class, every check-in. She did it without complaint, without shortcuts. Julian had witnessed many people crumble under less pressure, but his sister didn't. Not this time. Inside the courtroom, Layla's father, Gregory Harris, sat beside his attorney, arms crossed, eyes flickering towards the new judge. He hadn't said much since the suspension. The smirk was gone, replaced by a tense silence. Judge de Lacroix adjusted her glasses. After reviewing all submitted documentation and the defendant's recent compliance, the court finds sufficient grounds to reinstate shared custody between the parents, with a gradual transition to unsupervised visitation. Monique's reaction was delayed. The words took a second to fully register. Then, slowly, her shoulders relaxed, her hands unclenched, and she let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for years. Julian offered a slight grin. He knew this wasn't the end, but rather the rightful beginning of something she should have had long ago. Gregory's lawyer rose to object, but Judge de Lacroix held up a hand. "This court has seen enough. You may disagree with the decision, but the law supports it." And for once it was applied fairly. Outside the courthouse, Monique stepped into the sunlight, pausing just to stand there for a moment. The wind lifted her hair. She seemed taller than she had in months. Julian walked beside her, silent for a beat. "You did well in there," he said. She looked over, a genuine smile gracing her lips. "So did you." They stood on the steps, watching people filter out. Mostly strangers, but a few who had lingered after their own hearings just to witness the outcome of this one. "I thought it was over," she confessed. "Back when I was crying in that courtroom. I thought I'd lost her." "You didn't," Julian said. "They just made you believe you had no fight left." She nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I don't know how to thank you." He shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." Monique paused. "Yeah, I do. You showed up." They walked back to her car. Layla, waiting in the back seat with a book and juice box, spotted her mother and grinned widely. "Mommy," she squealed, pressing her face to the window. Monique opened the door and hugged her tightly, tears forming again, but this time they carried no shame. Later that week, Julian packed his bag for the return to DC. Monique made him coffee for the road and tucked a photo of her and Layla into the front pocket of his laptop case without a word. He found it on the train and smiled quietly to himself. A few rows away, a woman observed him and asked, "You look like you just got good news." Julian thought about everything. His sister's resilience, the battle they refused to abandon, and the judge who was finally held accountable. He nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I guess I did." But what lingered wasn't the ruling or the courtroom exchanges. It was the look in Monique's eyes. Proof that even when the system falters, people can still fight to make it right. 2 months later, Julian sat in his DC office. The distant hum of traffic was barely audible through the thick glass. His gaze rested on the framed photo on his desk. Monique and Layla on a park bench, Layla laughing, Monique mid-story, hand raised. In that moment, the photo was more than decoration. It was a potent reminder. Of all the cases he'd handled, the drug conspiracies, the financial crimes, the political scandals, nothing felt as significant as what had transpired in Toledo. This wasn't about prestige or career victories. It was about a system so accustomed to operating in obscurity that it never anticipated someone shining a light. It was about how easily someone like his sister could be relegated to background noise, deemed disposable, insignificant, and how close she came to internalizing that lie. He contemplated what might have happened had she not left that voicemail, had she not swallowed her pride, had he not listened. The fine line between justice and injustice sometimes boils down to who is watching back. Back in Toledo, Monique was steadily rebuilding. Piece by piece. Her work at the hospital had resumed. She secured a second-hand car, a slightly newer couch, and started looking at apartments with a second bedroom. Layla was enrolled in a new school, closer to their place, and every Friday, Monique helped her pick out a weekend book from the local library. Things weren't perfect. She and Gregory still navigated complexities, and the system still presented hurdles. But she was no longer merely surviving, she was parenting, truly parenting. At night, she'd sometimes call Julian. Not to dissect the case or vent frustrations, but just to talk. One evening, she admitted, "I still feel like I'm waiting for it all to fall apart again." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You won't. Because this time you're not doing it alone." That truth stayed with her. People often envision justice as a straight path. It's not. It's a labyrinth of blind corners, locked doors, and individuals who feign assistance while merely upholding the status quo. Sometimes the only way through requires someone who knows the map. Julian hadn't saved her. That's not how it works. He didn't swoop in and magically fix her life. But he showed up. He stood beside her. He ensured that those in positions of authority knew they weren't invisible. And for Layla, that made all the difference. Ultimately, this wasn't solely about a court ruling or a misconduct report. It was about reminding everyone of a simple yet profound truth. Everyone deserves to be heard. Everyone deserves a fair chance. And when the system forgets that, it falls upon us to make noise until it remembers. So, if you're watching, if this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of someone or challenged your perception of justice, know this. You don't need to be loud to be strong. You don't need to be perfect to be worthy. And you don't need a badge to hold people accountable. You just need to speak. And if your voice trembles, speak anyway. Because someone is listening. And sometimes that someone shows up when you least expect it, wearing a suit, carrying a briefcase, walking into a courtroom as if he already knows exactly how things are about to change. If this narrative moved you, if it connected with you or made you think differently about what justice truly entails, don't just scroll past. Share it. Comment. Subscribe. Let stories like Monique's resonate. Because for every courtroom that attempts to silence a voice, there's a community waiting outside, ready to declare, "We saw it. And we will not forget."